Get ready. It's my favorite part of the show. Money, power, politics, and we're going to Wall Street, where the markets just opened up a smidge, but the Dow has been down dramatically for the last day. It fell more than 600 points yesterday. And guess what happened? President Trump once again playing the blame game. Yesterday, he tweeted, quote, "The prospect of presidential harassment by the Dems is causing the stock market big headaches." Contrary to the president's belief, in the past, markets have thrived under gridlock in Washington. Joining me now to discuss, my dear friend Josh Brown, CEO of Ritholtz Wealth Management and a CNBC contributor. Okie doke. President is blaming the midterms, the fact that Democrats won in Congress, for why the stock market goes down. Here's what I don't understand. The day after the election, didn't the market go up?
500 Dow points. So actually, global markets went up the day after the election. So it's hard to ascribe any particular headline to any one day's events. So just broadly speaking, this is now week 8 of a correction that began in the late September. We're down about 7% from the high in the S&P. Not terrible, not out of character from what we've seen for the U.S. stock market. Certainly nothing to point at one political party or the other. Stocks move on interest rates and earnings. It's always been that way. It always will be that way, not geopolitical headlines.
Or presidential musings. But you actually say that gridlock is good for the markets. Why? Is it because there's no absolute power?
So the theory is that you don't have one party pushing all of their policies and getting away with everything that they want to do. And it works in both directions. So the chart that we flashed here that comes from Bank of America Merrill Lynch, there were only 7 years where Republicans had the White House, but a split Congress to contend with. Those 7 years averaged 12% returns. Not terrible. And I think having one party restraining the other, but still having a pro-growth environment, which we do, is not the end of the world. And I don't think stocks are selling off because any one president is being harassed.
Well, the president touts a booming stock market because of him. And many investors would agree. There's a lot of people who go out there and say all politicians are bad, but, you know, stocks are up 28% since he was elected, and I'm going to vote with that. Why are people so enthused by that? If you look at the market this year, it's flat.
Yeah, the market is basically flat on year. Last year was up about 22%. So average it. It's about 11%. That's what you got under Obama, give or take. It's not a big change in trend. It's not a sea change event. No one should be under that illusion. Stocks went up every year under Obama, who was supposed to be the anti-business president. And we had the worst decade in 70 years under George Bush, W. Bush, who was supposed to be the pro-business president. So we should really leave the White House out of our analysis for why markets rise and fall. Absolutely, the White House has an impact, but to take credit or to be given blame for one party or the other is ahistorical. Anyone that knows the data does not play that game.
All right, I want to bring Dom Chu in from CNBC, your friend and mine. All right, Dom, Bloomberg is reporting that President Trump is going to meet with his trade team today, and he wants to talk tariffs on European automakers. We know that the president is not happy with Emmanuel Macron. He feels angry. He feels slighted, especially after Macron's stark comments against nationalism, calling nationalism the opposite of patriotism. Is Trump now going to go after him with tariffs?
Well, the idea right now is that, you know, Josh had mentioned the idea that trade, the idea that earnings and the overall market environment is driven by those particular instances. Earnings are the most important thing. The geopolitical thing is noise in the grander scheme of things, but when it comes to trade policy, it is one of the things that's cited most often by the people we speak to on our air, this idea that trade and tariffs could be one of the biggest overhangs out there. The issue becomes now whether or not there could be some kind of room for at least a bipartisan approach to trade and tariffs if the president is able to do it with places like allies in Europe or in Japan or in South Korea. The real sticking point is going to be China. That is probably one of those situations where Democrats and Republicans can find common ground on trade and tariffs to go after China with. But autos are going to be a huge part of the discussion going forward, especially if there is talk of this idea of putting even more tariffs on European-made automobiles imported into the United States. It could also change, by the way, the dynamic of European automakers who have operations here, like BMW and Mercedes-Benz and others who produce cars in the United States for export to the other parts of the world.
Down in Lizzie Graham country. All right, I have to ask you both, Josh, to you first, about this Amazon announcement. We've been hearing about the beauty pageant for a year and a half, where headquarter 2 was going to be. All of these cities pulling together all this information, offering incentives, tax breaks, everything under the sun, so they could re-energize their cities.
Yeah.
And the cities chosen, New York City and Northern Virginia. Two cities,
yeah.
They don't need to get their game back. What do you make of this? And I want to share what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, quote, Amazon's $1 billion, more than $1 billion company. The idea that it will receive hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks at a time when our subway is crumbling and our communities need more investment, not less, concerning to residents here.
First of all, let me say what a Cinderella story this is. Just a classic rags to riches. These ne'er-do-well
New York
cities.
down on its luck.
Oh, man, what a rescue. Well, I think it probably came down to talent and infrastructure. And when you go to Long Island City, you're right across the water from Manhattan. You have millions of people that potentially could work for you.
Great.
I don't know that you could
Josh?
say that about some of these other cities
Fine.
that maybe needed it more.
Jeff Bezos could have known that with one trip to Long Island City versus one trip to Baltimore.
Right.
He didn't need to have 22 cities involved in this, competing, not to mention, Dom Chu, the amount of free data. Data is the most valuable thing to Amazon, and every one of those cities pulled together an enormous amount of information about demographics and everything else that they then handed over to Amazon for free to get nothing back. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to say, yeah, get it done in New York. You got loads of talent there.
Well, it's not just that, too. This idea, and Ocasio-Cortez kind of hit on something that many New York area residents have been talking about for quite some time. The idea of gentrification, this idea that you're upping some of the neighborhoods and you're basically affecting affordability for housing in the New York area. With Amazon, presumably, if these jobs are decent paying for New York City area wages, that will in some ways, in many ways, elevate real estate prices across the board, not just for residential, but for commercial, anything like that. So if you do have an Amazon HQ2 and Long Island City, like Josh points out, it's going to be one of these. It's not exactly a situation. I know he was being tongue-in-cheek about it, but still, it's going to raise the cost of living for a lot of folks out there. That is the concern, and one of the ways that people are looking at
already one of the most expensive cities in America.
But won't it also contribute to the improvement of lifestyles? I think this issue is never black and white. People are going to make more money working for Amazon.
Yes.
So it's not. And by the way, Bezos is not responsible to fix our subway systems. We've had 40 years to do that. So I think you do want Amazon to come if they're willing to come. But what are you giving up? What does the tax break thing look like?
Fine, but then why did you do this massive search with all these cities?
Why did Jeff do it?
Yes, if you were going to pick New York City.
I don't think he thought he would.
It's shopping.
I don't know that he thought he would. I really don't know that. How could we know?
Do you think it's honest shopping, Dom Chu? Come on now.
No. So what this is I mean, you're basically, if you're in that position of leverage, you're saying to some municipality, we're going to bring tens of thousands of higher paying jobs. What you're going to look and do is angle and pit everybody against each other to see what the best tax breaks that you can get are, the best situations for overall improvement. All of that stuff is happening because Amazon is literally, and I believe that they were, trying to legitimately play towns against each other to leverage the best deal they possibly could.
I think the DC thing was going to happen either way, by the way.
Yes, so the richest man in modern history said to cities across America, dance, dance, and we did.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.